World War II, the Axis versus the Allies. The road to World War II. I want you to take a minute and get a piece of paper out and tell me what is being depicted in this picture and who are the other people in this picture and what does the cartoonist think of them. Both of these questions we will talk about tomorrow in class. In January 1933, Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany. Almost immediately after becoming Chancellor, Hitler soon orders a program of rearming Germany. You can see in the pictures that Hitler is visiting factories all across Germany, and he's being greeted enthusiastically. Many Germans were grateful for jobs after the misery of the Depression years. In March 1936, German troops marched into the Rhineland. The Rhineland was a region of Germany that was demilitarized after the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was not supposed to have troops in that region. Hitler's actions showed how he was willing to directly challenge the treaty. Okay, and you can see here by this picture and the arrows that this is the area called the Rhineland that we are talking about. Just pretty much the same time as the German occupation of the Rhineland was taking place, we have the Spanish Civil War. And it's important to note the Spanish Civil War because of two reasons. One, it was a civil war that put two sides of Spain together separate, which kind of helped them kept them out of the war of World War II. You had the Republican Spain side, which was the Spanish loyalist or communist, and they were supported by Mexico and the Soviet Union. You also had the rebel nationalists, which were the anti-communist, and their supporters included Italy and Germany. Now, when we talk about the alliances that were formed during World War II, you'll realize that the Soviet Union and Italy and Germany were on opposite sides. So even before the war breaks out, we have this division taking place. So how does the Spanish Civil War impact World War II? For the dictators of Italy and Germany and the Soviet Union, it was an opportunity to test their weapons, including tanks, planes, and they really were trying to see how they would work in the field of battle. Next, we have in March 1938, Nazi Germany annexing Austria. Again, this went against the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which banned Germany from uniting with Austria. However, the arrival of German troops was met with great enthusiasm by many Austrian people. And here again is a picture of what we're talking about, the annexation of Austria in the area there. In March 1939, Germany invades Czechoslovakia. Hitler had ordered the occupation of a part of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland. Many hoped that this would be the last conquest of the Nazis. However, in March 1939, he ordered his troops to take over the remainder of Czechoslovakia. This was the first aggressive step that suggested that a war in Europe would soon begin. Also in 1939, Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact. Both Hitler and Stalin signed this pact known as the Non-Aggression Pact. They promised that neither country would attack the other in the event of a war. As part of the deal, Hitler promised Stalin part of Poland, which he planned to invade soon. The Non-Aggression Pact was surprising. Hitler and Stalin were seen as natural enemies. When Hitler talked of taking over new land for Germany, many thought that he had meant Russia. At the time, Hitler had really hated communism, which was the form of government in Russia. Later in 1939, Germany does indeed invade Poland. Germany marched into Poland without fear of an attack from Russia. On September 3rd, 1939, Germany invades Poland and in essence starts a war with Britain and France. And here you see German troops marching into the capital city of Warsaw. So the stage is really set. What ends up happening in Poland is this concept called Blitzkrieg. And Blitzkrieg is a style of warfare that employs fast-moving armored divisions that are supported by air power. like I said before, the Allies now are left with no choice but to come to the aid of Poland. So when Germany does invade, France and England declare war. In May 1940, Germany turned west and invades France and the Netherlands. Again, remember, they turn west because they have no fear of a Soviet Union attack in Germany because of the Non-Aggression Pact. Germany used blitzkrieg tactics to attack France and the Netherlands. British troops were forced to retreat from the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France. By June 1940, France had surrendered to the Germans. Britain now stood alone as the last remaining enemy of Hitler's Germany in Western Europe. And you can see here there's a picture of Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. September 1940 to May 1941 is a time known as the Blitz. For those 9 months, the German Air Force, which is known as the Luftwaffe, launched repeated bombing raids on British towns and cities, hence why it was known as the Blitz. It was an attempt to bomb Britain into submission. Now, for some reason, Hitler, instead of continuing on in the West and trying to take Britain, turns their attention east and to an operation called Barbarossa, which happens in June 1941. He decides that instead of bombing Britain, he wanted to attack Russia. He, in doing so, betrays Stalin and ignored the promises that he had made. Okay, this was a very bold move and would be thought to it would prove to be an important turning point in the war. So again, I'd like you to take a second, pause the video after I'm done speaking, and say, why was Hitler's decision to abandon the Battle of Britain and attack Russia a major turning point in World War II? Again, take a minute, jot down your thoughts. We will talk about this tomorrow in class. So let's review. Hitler's plan. Hitler wanted to establish the German Third Reich. He predicted that his Reich, the Third Reich, would last for over 1,000 years. His long-range plans were to rid the Reich of any and all races that were not of Germanic descent, basically meaning the Jews, Gypsies, etc. So again, Operation Barbarossa. On June 22nd, 1941, Hitler invades Russia. The operation encompassed a total troop strength of about 4 million men, making it the biggest single land operation ever. They benefited a lot from initial surprise, but by the end of July, Hitler had occupied a portion of France twice the size of Russia. And you can see here by the arrows in which way they're pointing the different troop movements. The German army was split into 3 different groups: the North, the Center, and the South group. So, the Center group, Battle of Moscow. With the Germans' successes in the North and South, Hitler assumed that Stalin's regime was on the verge of collapse. He authorized an advance on Moscow before the onset of winter. Already, however, the Germans were suffering from serious supply shortage. By September, the supply system was only meeting current tactical consumption needs. No supply stores for the winter season were being built. The Germans caught the Russians unprepared and made great advances. The Soviet army seemed on the verge of collapse. At this point, the weather broke and autumn rains turned the roads to mud. The German advance stalled, allowing the Russians to hurry reinforcements from the interior. By December 4th, the Germans had clawed their way to Moscow's outskirts, but they could not continue. That night, temperatures were negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit. One infantry regiment suffered 300 frostbite casualties. On December 6th, the Soviets counterattacked. Now, right about this time of the Battle of Moscow, America and Japan enter the war, and it's important to note both entrances into the war, and we'll talk a little bit about them at another time in class. But just a brief summary. December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. America joins the Allies while Japan joins the Axis. The addition of both countries greatly impacts the war, like I said. The Japanese opened a new front of war in Asia and the Pacific. The Americans joined the war and quickly changed the tide in Europe. So, back to Operation Barbarossa and the Battle of Stalingrad, the summer of 1942. As spring 1942 approached, German commanders recommended remaining on the defensive, but Hitler believed that the Germans must destroy Soviet military potential before the American industrial power could come into play. Hitler developed a plan to capture Soviet oil. At first, Hitler considered Stalingrad of little importance, other than the fact that its capture might block the movement of petroleum up the Volga River. On August 24th, the Germans attacked Stalingrad's suburbs and began fighting their way into the city. The nature of the urban fighting favored the defenders, and the Soviets mounted a stubborn defense. Stalingrad began to drain the German army, but Hitler would not back off. On November 19th, the Soviets launched a massive counterattack north of Stalingrad. Hitler's overly centralized and completely out-of-touch command system broke down in the face of the Soviet onslaught. The Soviets encircled Stalingrad, and Hitler ordered his commanders to stay fast anyway. By this point in the war, no one was willing to confront Hitler. All attempts to break out or break through failed, and on February 2nd, the Germans surrendered. Out of 250,000 soldiers trapped in the Stalingrad pocket, approximately 90,000 became prisoners. Barely 5,000 of those 90,000 survived till the end of the war. So, here is the farthest point of the Axis advance in Europe, and you can see they had a large majority of Europe under their control. So, in summary, Operation Barbarossa. Ultimately, enormous logistical shortcomings made Barbarossa a failure. Germany proved capable of fighting battles very well, but was less capable of fighting a war of prolonged duration. In the total 4 years of fighting on the Eastern Front, an estimated 4 million Axis and 9 million Russians were killed in battle. 20 million Soviet civilians were killed as a result of extermination campaigns against Jews, communists, and partisans, casual massacres, reprisal killings, diseases, and sometimes planned starvation. So, the U.S. enters the war. The Allies had been calling for an offensive front in the Western Europe, mainly in France. They felt that by making a second front for Germany, they would have to spread their lines so thin that they would eventually collapse. The war in the Pacific after the attack on Pearl Harbor was the main focus of the United States for about 2 years. Other things that happened in the war on Europe, just a couple brief things so that you're familiar with them. Operation Torch, Casablanca Conference, Battle of Atlantic, Sicily invasion, Italy mainland invasion, Anzio landings, and Rome falling. Okay, just keep those under your brains. More on Operation Overlord. Okay, Operation Overlord was the D-Day landings at Normandy Beach, and after that, Paris fell. Then the Battle of the Bulge, then the bridge at Regiment, and eventually in May 7th, 1945, the surrender of Germany. So this is Operation Overlord, the plan to take back France and open a second front in the war. So, D-Day. D-Day was the largest land, sea, and air operation in military history. Despite air support, German retaliation was brutal, especially on Omaha Beach. Within a month, the Allies had landed 1 million troops, okay, and over 500,000 tons of supplies and 170,000 vehicles on the beaches. Okay. The Atlantic Wall was the defense system developed by the Germans to defend off an invasion invasion to France from sea. You can see here pictures of some of the bunkers and some of the wood that they were really planning. They were really prepared for a heavy invasion. Omaha Beach. Many of you might know this because of the movie Saving Private Ryan. If you do not, we will be watching a clip of Saving Private Ryan later in class, so you'll get an idea of what D-Day was like and what the beaches look like. So Omaha Beach was 6 miles wide. It was the largest of all the 5 beaches. The landings at Omaha are most remembered for the casualties the Americans took there. 2,400 Americans died on Omaha Beach alone on this day. That's about a quarter of all the casualties. Okay. After the landings of Normandy, the Allies forced themselves inland, and they eventually get held up at a place known as the Battle of the Bulge, which occurred from December 16th, 1944 to January 26, 1945. Okay. In October 1944, the Americans captured their first German town, Aachen. The Allies were really starting to close in on Germany. Hitler responded with one last-ditch massive offensive. Hitler hoped that by breaking through the Allied line, it would break up the Allied supplies. The battle raged for a month. The Germans had been pushed back. Little seemed to have changed, but the fact the Germans had sustained heavy losses. Germany lost 120,000 troops, 600 tanks, and 1,600 planes. From that point on, the Nazis could do little but retreat. The Allies take Berlin. Hitler commits suicide. By April 25, 1945, the Soviet army had stormed Berlin. In his underground headquarters in Berlin, Hitler prepared for the end. On April 29th, he married his longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun, then wrote a last note in which he blamed the Jews for starting the war and his generals for losing it. The next day, he gave poison to his wife and shot himself. The Germans then surrender. General Eisenhower accepted the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. On May 8, 1945, the Allies celebrated VE Day, meaning Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe was finally over. At the Yalta Conference, in February 1945, as the Allies pushed toward victory in Europe, an ailing FDR met with Churchill and Stalin at the Black Sea resort of Yalta in the Soviet Union. A series of compromises were worked out concerning post-war Europe. What they actually ended up agreeing upon. They agreed to divide Germany into 4 occupied zones after the war. Stalin agreed to free elections in Eastern Europe. And the last thing was Stalin agreed to help the U.S. in the war against Japan and to join the United Nations. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is World War II in a nutshell. Now, again, make sure you answer the questions that were brought up about throughout the video, and come to class ready to talk more about the different aspects that were mentioned here. Have a great night.